Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome Senator Ted Cruz, Chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, for a keynote address.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is terrific to be with you. Let me start by saying thank you to all of the innovators in the room, all of the people who are creating jobs, who are driving technology forward. That is enormously important. You know, I grew up in the tech world. My parents were both mathematicians and both computer programmers at the dawn of the computer age. My dad came out of the University of Texas as a Cuban immigrant in 1961, and he went to work at IBM as a programmer in 1962. And my mother beat him by a decade. She came out of Rice in 1956 and went to work at Shell as a computer programmer. And they, for 40 years, owned a small business doing seismic data processing. My first job as a kid was as a computer operator. My parents hired me at age 8 to operate Raytheon 704 and 706 mini computers, mini being a misnomer because they were the size of a wall. And they used tapes and key punches, and they have less power than you have in your iPhone. And I got to say, tech has gone a long way since then. Now, government can have a profound impact on technology and on jobs. My number one priority in the Senate, my number one priority as the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, is very simple. It is jobs, jobs, jobs. And let me give a corollary to that, which is in the tech world in particular, I want America to win. I am unabashed in wanting America to win, to dominate and lead when it comes to technology, to dominate and lead when it comes to energy, to dominate and lead when it comes to jobs. Now, government policies can both facilitate the creation of jobs and they can stifle the creation of jobs. On the facilitation side, one of my very top priorities as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee is opening up more electromagnetic spectrum to the private sector. I have legislation that would create a pipeline mandating the federal government make at least 600 megahertz of additional spectrum available to the private sector. Right now, the federal government is sitting on a ton of spectrum, and many of the landlords, so to speak, don't want to give it up. DOD in particular is the worst offender on this regard. DOD routinely says, no, we can give up no spectrum whatsoever. Congress is going to move forward with budget reconciliation this year, and I'm working very hard to ensure that budget reconciliation includes my spectrum pipeline bill. Why is that? Because there are very few policies government can enact that would create more jobs, that would unleash more billions in private investment than opening up spectrum to commercial development. Now, I would note, DOD is nonetheless dug in. I recently had a classified briefing where an array of top brass sat there and said, no, 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 we can give up nothing, no. I don't think I'm revealing any classified secrets with that. I will tell you, in that briefing, I asked two simple questions. I said, well, what do you do with the fact that over 50 nations across the world have already auctioned off portions of that spectrum that you say you desperately need and you cannot operate without? Is it the position of DOD that our Navy doesn't work in the Pacific? That we can only guard Topeka, Kansas, but we can't actually go anywhere else in the world? And if it's not, if our systems do work in places where there are commercial operators in the spectrum, then what the heck are you talking about? And they had no good answer to that. Second question I asked them, I said, how many of our servicemen and women carry cell phones with them? The answer to that would be all of them. And I asked a very simple question. Tell me, from a national security perspective, is it good or bad for China to win the race to 6G and for Huawei and China to dominate the global telecom architecture? They, of course, admitted that'd be terrible. To which I said, well, then get off your ass and let's make sure that doesn't happen. So that's on the proactive side. But how about government killing jobs? Well, I've got to say, when it comes to AI, I think we've seen in the previous administration policies that made very little sense. And I'm going to tell you right now, I actually think AI was one of the sleeper issues of this last election. It was one of the most consequential outcomes of this last election. Last year, I teamed up with former Texas Senator Phil Gramm. The two of us wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on AI. And we started by doing something that might surprise you. We started by praising a Democrat president. We praised Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, that's kind of funny, you're laughing, it doesn't seem like a Democrat anymore. It was before Democrats went nuts. Bill Clinton was president at the dawn of the internet. And Bill Clinton at the time signed an executive order that memorialized a light touch regulatory approach to the internet. That was exactly the right thing to do. I'm going to give you an amazing stat that we cited in that op-ed. In 1993, the U.S. economy and the economy of Europe were virtually identical. However, the EU took a very different path. The EU took a heavy-handed prior approval regulatory approach to the internet. The consequences have been stunning. In 1993, our economies were virtually identical. Today, the American economy is 50% larger than the European economy. There are two drivers of that: tech and the shale revolution. And what Phil and I argued, very simply, is that AI is the next transformational development. It's happening right now, that will be every bit as impactful as the internet was 30 years ago. The internet changed everything about our lives. AI is going to do the same thing. And yet, there are a lot of voices, especially in the Biden administration, but also in the Senate, and I recognize in this room as well, who wanted America to adopt Europe's approach, which is a heavy-handed prior approval regulatory approach. That was embodied in the Biden AI executive order, or as I like to call it, the AIEIO. The longest executive order in American history. Now, I'll tell you, I predicted last year during the election that if President Trump won, he would revoke that EO. He did so on the first day in office. Quite rightly. I believe that approach of putting government in charge of innovation in AI would almost ensure America loses the race to AI. And I think losing the race to AI would be catastrophic. There are also serious problems with government being in charge of AI, including using so-called safety standards to engage in rampant censorship, to define as misinformation anything the left disagrees with. We saw Mark Zuckerberg telling Joe Rogan how the Biden administration pressured Meta take down any information about the side effects of the COVID vaccine. We don't want anyone to know that. We saw the Biden administration, and even before that, the FBI, pressuring social media companies pull down any arguments that the COVID virus originated in a Chinese government lab. By the way, that is now the official position of most government agencies. But it was deemed misinformation. You are not allowed to even say that, and we will silence you for saying that. At this point, there are so many things that have been called conspiracy theories that we now know are true. I really am wondering if the federal government has aliens somewhere in Nevada. To be clear, I don't know, but if they do, I'd really like to know. I think it is profoundly dangerous to put government in charge of AI and to masquerade censorship as somehow protecting safety. A view you disagree with is not a threat to your safety. But silencing opposing views is very much a threat to your freedom, a threat to truth, and a threat ultimately to your safety. We also have a very consistent problem that when you put government in charge of technology, in charge of prior approvals, in charge of innovation, what you end up is a handful of giant players getting in bed with government and having their monopolies protected for all time. We see that in Europe quite a bit. Look, let's be clear, big business loves big government. But when it comes to AI, I don't want the United States of Google. And I certainly don't want the United States of Huawei. You know, there's a great meme online. It's a picture from 1978 of the founders of Microsoft. And you have Paul Allen with long hair and a beard. He looks like one of the Bee Gees. You have Bill Gates with glasses the size of hubcaps. They're all college dropouts. They all look like hippies. And it simply says, would you invest money with these guys? And mind you, they were taking on Big Blue. They were taking on IBM, the Leviathan. They were a bunch of crazy kids doing something impossible. Well, now Microsoft is one of those giants. And let me be clear, when it comes to the economy, I'm a big fan of Joseph Schumpeter, the economist who talked about creative destruction. What sets the American economy apart from most of the rest of the world is the creative destruction, the next great innovator that topples the giant, that topples the previous monopoly through innovation. And when you put government in charge of innovation, you end up stifling that competition. And in fact, when it comes to AI, big tech would be perfectly happy to have government shut off any new entrants, any new innovation, and ensure that they remain in power. And by the way, then you end up with things like DeepSeek. If we don't innovate, we'll lose. And if China dominates AI for the world, that is a profoundly bad outcome for America and for the rest of the world. Now, does that mean we should have no rules, no regulation concerning AI? No, of course not. But there are a whole lot of things, existing rules and regulations that can apply already. So, can AI be used for fraud? Yes. Every tool invented by man can be used for criminal conduct. The wheel, you could drive a car into a crowd and kill people. Every tool invented by man can be used for fraud, and AI certainly can be used for fraud. But every state in the union already has existing laws against fraud. And so we have tools in place to go after misuse, criminal conduct. Now, will there be new applications that require changes in those rules? Yes, and I'll give you an example of it. Legislation that I authored called the Take It Down Act. You may recall the president talked about my legislation in the State of the Union 2 days ago. Take It Down Act addresses non-consensual intimate images. And it addresses two circumstances. Number one, real images, explicit images, often taken between romantic partners, and then you have a breakup. And one of the partners gets ticked off and publishes it to the world. It's a grotesque violation of privacy. But a second permutation that AI has brought into the world is the growing prevalence of deep fakes. At the State of the Union, Melania Trump's guest was a young girl from Texas sitting next to her. Her name's Elliston Berry. She's 15 years old. Elliston is from Aledo, Texas. At Elliston, when she was 14, when she was a freshman in high school, a classmate of hers took an innocent picture of hers from social media and used AI to create deep fake nude pictures of her. Now, they weren't real, but they looked very real. And that classmate sent those pictures to her classmates, and she woke up one Monday morning with texts and phone calls from her friends saying, all your classmates are seeing naked pictures of you. She was understandably in tears. Look, it's hard enough to be a teenager, much less to have to deal with that. Well, the Take It Down Act makes it a felony to post non-consensual intimate images, real or deep fakes. Now, why was that needed? Because existing laws didn't cover deep fakes. They weren't written. The existing laws said it had to be a picture of you, and a deep fake was not a picture of you under the existing law. But there's a second component of the Take It Down Act. I sat down with Elliston and her mother in my office a number of months ago when I introduced the bill to the Take It Down Act. And I asked her, I said, what happened to the pictures? And she said, oh, they're still up. She said they've been up for 9 months on Snapchat. And her mother said, I've called Snapchat, I've emailed them, I've pressed them, they will not take them down. I just get ignored, I get stonewalled. I turned to my staff, I said, I want you to get the CEO of Snapchat on the phone today. I want those pictures down today. They were down within 2 hours. Now, you know what? It should not take a sitting United States senator to make a phone call to the CEO to get pictures down. So the Take It Down Act puts a legal obligation on any tech platform to remove non-consensual intimate images when notified. And we actually borrowed an existing legal and regulatory framework from the Millennial Copyright Act. So look, all of us know if you tweet out right now a song from The Lion King, it'll be pulled down within hours. Why? Because you can't tweet out stuff that is copyrighted or trademarked. And every tech platform has offices that are devoted to pulling that content down. We use the exact same mechanism to say if a victim notifies you, hey, that's me, and I didn't consent to that picture or that video being out there, that the tech platform has an obligation to pull it down. Now, my legislation has passed the Senate unanimously. It's bipartisan legislation. Amy Klobuchar and I wrote it together. It passed the Senate 100-0. And this week, the First Lady came to Capitol Hill to urge the House to take it up and pass it. The Speaker of the House is committed to doing that. And as I said, the President brought it up in the State of the Union this week. Now, I point to that as an example of the kind of regulation that I think makes sense for AI, which is specifically targeted to a real problem and narrowly tailored to address that problem. Not a broad brush regulatory approach that would empower government to silence and stifle innovation. So I want to close the way I started by saying to the folks here, thank you. Thank you for your work on innovation. And by the way, let me say one other thing. There are those who present apocalyptic pictures of where AI is going to go. Back in 2015, I actually chaired the very first congressional hearing on AI. One of the first questions I asked at that hearing is, does anyone here know the date Skynet goes active? Look, I don't know. I don't pretend to be smart enough to know if AI will someday take over the world and exterminate humanity. But I'll say this, if there are going to be killer robots, I'd rather they be American robots than Chinese robots. I don't believe we can be ostriches and stick our head in the sand and say, no, 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 technology must stop now because we don't like where it's going. I think it is far better for America to lead and innovate. And so I can tell you the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, we have jurisdiction over 40% of the U.S. economy, including all of telecom, all of communications, all of the internet, all of AI. And if you care about jobs, there are very few positions in all of government that are better positioned to fight for jobs than chairing the Senate Commerce Committee. So I appreciate the chance to be with you, and again, thank you for the good work you're doing.